Story number 1. I woke to the color of a sky that refused to commit. Neither storm nor shine, only a dim hush above our house. Some mornings feel borrowed. Others arrive like debt collectors. This one was both. Overcast, mild temperature. A soft gray pressed its face to the glass. An owl turns its head to stare through our window as we awaken. It watched, as if counting down in a language of feathers and patience. I didn't need a clock to know the day already had its hands around my throat. The first sound was the sounds of violent seizing on the floor by my bed, a wet percussion that no human heart ever learns to hear without breaking. I moved without thinking, like a dream that decides for you. Knees to the hardwood, palms beneath her skull, voice at her ear, stumbling in a stupor to cradle my wife's head and soothe her as eyes rolled into the back of the head, joints locked and pulled while her mouth foamed. The liturgy I now knew by muscle and by terror, finding the opening in her mouth to administer her rescue medication mid-azalam, watching the paste coat her gums and hoping that it will settle her, whispering, I loved her, assuring her I loved her and didn't want to hurt her. Some prayers have syringes. Some amens arrive with sirens. They came with blue flashing lights, and I stepped sideways out of the life I thought we had. Paramedics gently moving me aside to administer oxygen and prep her for moving to the ambulance. The road to the hospital unfolded like a tongue in a giant's mouth, tasting our fear. The long drive to the hospital, the slow but steady come around with confusion. A doctor's well-meaning smiles that never managed to reach the tone, only the surface of their collected faces. Compassion can be warm. It can also be distant enough to echo, you're doing the best you can, given the circumstances. That's what they said, and maybe it was true, but truth doesn't always pay what it owes. Out past the curtain, I kept seeing something, a stubborn residue of night under the fluorescence, shadows clinging to the last vestiges of darkness that the powerful fluorescent lights could not reach. Not enough for panic, enough to plant dread, like a seed behind my ribs. I thanked the man in the white coat anyway, packed up my wife's things, and carried hope like a borrowed coat 2 sizes too small, knowing I'd be back again before long, knowing it'd only get worse from here. Amelia is sick. If you followed me this far, you already know that. But saying it draws blood in a new place each time. We'd been having a spirited nerf war in our new house. 2 fools who took vows and still believed vows were armor. She lost her footing, stumbled, and slurred something before smashing her skull on the coffee table and seizing on the floor. What I remember is the sound her skull made as it collided with the mahogany. A private thunder. They said it was a stroke. And then the screen lit up with a moon that had learned to burrow. High-quality scans showcasing a highlighted mass gripping into the soft flesh of her brain. Amelia has glioblastoma. Aggressive glioblastoma. The room did not move, but the light tilted anyway. The doctor kept speaking about radiotherapy, about surgeries with enormous risks, about pills to manage the suffering. I watched her mouth form words, while a hum crept into the walls like a second, uglier heartbeat. It felt as though someone poured oil into my eyes and told me to read the future, Something cold touched my shoulders. Nothing there, and everything there. Before I could protest, Amelia's hand is in mine. She said, "No, I won't be needing treatment. We'll do this our own way. Thank you." She stood with that soft-souled courage she kept for emergencies, nodded at the woman in the glasses, and left. The doctor's lenses fogged. The air changed temperature, and she extends a small card, a quiet rebellion passed hand to hand. If she doesn't want treatment, that's fine, but you could still do something from our extensions branch. I nodded, because language had become a hallway with no doors. Outside, my eyes fixated on her hair, tied into blonde and pink space buns. A little galaxy she wore like a crown, walking with purpose in her step, humming to herself. It's funny the things you can still love while the world is arranging the bill. The truth was no longer wearing gloves. Amelia has mere months to live. My wonderful, kind, one-of-a-kind wife has months to live. Grief doesn't arrive in black. It comes in beige, forms to sign, discharge notes, a refrigerator where nothing tastes like itself. Still, I memorized the ritual. Stabilize, transport, apologize to the nurses with my grateful eyes. At home, the air felt like we'd inherited someone else's house, someone braver. That night, the weather rehearsed for a storm it couldn't finish. Dark clouds, rain batters the windows, and in its refusal to be discouraged, a black beetle showed up on our sill like a stubborn thought, his iridescent shell glistening as if pretending to be alive were enough to count as living. I put him in an old shoe, the way we shelter the parts of ourselves we can't name. People talk about the way the sick light up a room. That was never Amelia's way. She had 2 sons, one for the world, calm, collected, and dignified, content to let a party spend itself without needing to touch it. The other burned in private, rambunctious, witty, eccentric, and always studying something you couldn't pronounce on the first try, from cryptozoology to agriculture and Roman history. She'd go spelunking through the stacks until night forgot itself. When we met, she was in her surrealist year. We bonded over my Twin Peaks cap and a mutual crush on the precise wrong records. We watched Eraserhead, and she took my hand and said, "This is it, Jasper. I no longer need to search." The prophecy worked. It just didn't say what for. I need you to understand who she is, because otherwise, the next part reads like a crime. That first month involved a lot of pent-up emotions on my end and stoic optimism on hers. She believed in powers that be, but not in a god with an address. I believed in remembering the smell of her hair on a good morning. The decline was not a slide, but a calendar. Muscles weaken, cognitive abilities grow worse, memory falter. There are sentences you never think you'll say until you hear your mouth say them. "I'm your husband, not a teacher, not an intruder," I whispered to my 32-year-old wife, while a clock that couldn't help itself kept track nearby. That evening, diazepam doing its labor. The heavy rain muffled my screams. I went to the car to practice the worst version of breathing. That's when I remembered the card. Black stock, red velvet letters, a lotus, and a painted skull, like an inside joke between monks. Do you want more time? It asked. Which is what all cards ask if you read them long enough. An address, a name, Dr. D's Life Extension Service, a proud subsidiary of St. Martin's Hospital. A motto pressed with an official medical seal. Moments are finite, but memories are infinite. I laughed once, a sound that broke on the edges. Then I called my mother-in-law, lied about new meds, and drove into a night that had found an extra darkness. Just for me. The location was wrong on purpose. A converted shipping container in a lot that remembered cars the way a scar remembers a blade. Rust gnawed at the white paint. Neon kept insisting it knew the time. The door looked expensive. Black and gold patterns folding inward to a peephole like a pupil. I lifted the knocker, and the door swung open. And a man smiled from behind circular sunglasses, and a modified plague mask like this was the exact hour he'd been expecting. You're here for the pierogi? Cinnamon and ginseng breezed past with his voice. I wasn't. He knew. I know what you're here for, Mr. Lambert. Come on in and sit in any seat you like. He moved like someone born backstage. Busy hands rummaged through instruments that didn't confess their names. What is your spouse's affliction? The word glioblastoma left my mouth like ash. He nodded once, like a man who can read weather from bone. What makes your wife happiest? I tried the easy answers. Travel, strawberry ice cream, rainy days. And he shook his head gently. This is not a resume. So I told the truth. Lately, happiness was the first precious minutes or hours after waking. Those rare islands where the pain called in sick, and she could prune her bonsai, spends time with her lizards, talk to them in a grammar of tenderness. Happiness is the luxury of not thinking about death for a while. Before, I said, and here it pierced a new place. It was the prospect of becoming a mother. He set a thick leather tome on the table, pricked my finger, and asked the question that felt like an elevator with no buttons. What scares you, Jasper? The answer was simple enough to ruin you. Nothing, except for losing her before we're ready. The life extension contract didn't pretend to be anything else. Once you sign, you will fear everything. 30 days of apparent wellness, he said. And then the bill comes due. We can always renegotiate. He even offered to wait until she's eaten before the clock began. Like mercy could be measured by the teaspoon. He pushed a vial of blue liquid across the table as if sliding me a season in a bottle. He kept talking about pierogi, like a man who tells you where the joke is so you won't miss it and hate him later. I asked what was in it. Oh, that'd be telling, he sang, and the air shivered. When I left, the night had grown a black void with appetite. The trees developed hands. Something pulled at my ankles as I ran, but didn't catch me. I locked my doors, fed blue to the morning juice, and rehearsed my private conviction. If fear is the price, I will pay. If the moon asks for interest, I will pay that too. I told myself I was buying more time. The truth, which I could only admit later, was uglier and more faithful. I was buying a few more mornings where she could think, be coherent, and be her normal self. And I could breathe without the room leaning. The rain started like a rumor and kept its promises. You learn to measure days by the weight of the glass on the window, not the numbers on a calendar. Dark clouds. Rain batters the windows, and the house answered with slow breathing in its studs. Wood expanding like old men telling long truths on the sill. A small emissary persisted, a black beetle that crawls across our windowsill, steadfast in his job that remains unknown to us. It carried a small twig in its mandibles, a purpose too humble for human language. I gave him sanctuary in an old shoe. Dedication should always be rewarded. Grief breeds rituals. Mercy is one I could still afford. People say their beloveds light up a room. But Amelia didn't arrive as lightning. She arrived as weather. The kind that remakes a coastline and never apologizes. She had two carefully tuned stations. One was public radio, the calm, collected, and dignified side that the outside world sees. A woman who could stand at the wallflower's edge and edit the party without touching it. The other was pirate broadcast, the rambunctious, witty, eccentric woman who hoarded facts like charms, lit by a hunger that never slept. From cryptozoology to agriculture and Roman history. She dove in headfirst until midnight forgot itself, then came back to me to stage the findings in our living room. First year we met. Her world was surreal on purpose, a lover of surrealist films, art, and music. The town had one theater and a busted neon that flickered like a faulty heartbeat. We pretended that made us the only two awake. We bonded over my Twin Peaks cap and a mutual affection for the wrong corners of the record store. Mike Patton's voice like a dare. Espresso at hours that did not ask permission. Our first date, watching Eraserhead on a screen that looked more patient than the audience. After, she took my hand and said, "This is it, Jasper. I no longer need to search." I believed her in a way I had never believed anyone, because believing her felt like stepping onto warm, dry land. But now, the house belonged to weather reports. Rain posted itself to the windows as if it had a lease. I watched the beetle test the arch of the shoe and thought about the shape of endurance. What does persistence look like when it knows there is no victory? Insect answers. Keep moving. Carry what you can. Make one more inch become yours. Amelia, even sick, kept both stations in working order. The public voice answered messages with calm, collected syllables, smiled in places the world expects a smile to fit. The private voice loomed in our kitchen, hair dyed blonde and pink from better months, asking whether basilisks were a misremembered monitor lizard, and if anybody had ever proven that a city could love you back. She'd quiz me between sips of tea. Which emperor outlawed purple for commoners? Which rainforests smelled like pepper in the dark? I learned to love the questions even when I failed the test. Especially then. It was a way to say, we're still here, even when the calendar suggests otherwise. We kept small altars, bonsai under the east window, lizards in their warm glass cities, a box of Nerf darts that turned into fossils at the back of a drawer. She'd laugh when I located another dart beneath the couch with a sigh, and I'd say I was discovering artifacts from an earlier civilization. Ours. She'd correct my timeline like a museum placard. Then the room would tilt to the left, and I'd be there with the soft towel, the gentle announcements, the pulse counting. Between storms, we still found a porch of clear air. I want to tell you who she is, because, otherwise, I fear my decision-making will look like I loved a theory more than a person. Amelia did not orbit me. She never asked me to be her son. We were two travelers sharing rations. She told me once that love is the only study where a wrong answer can still be generous. I didn't understand then. I am learning. The beetle shifted in his shoe. I imagined he heard the rain, the way we hear hospital air. Loud. Everywhere. A kind of weather you're not invited to correct. I thought about that line we always use. It was never a dull moment with her. And how even clichés can be faithful when they have names attached. I thought about the first time she looked at my hand like it was an address she'd been searching for. And I thought about search itself. This is it. I no longer need to search. What if the answer to a search is not a location, but a person's breath near yours? The exact temperature of their laugh, the tension, moved through the room with careful feet. I could feel the second month stack itself on my shoulders. I could feel the future line up at the door like umbrellas, each one with a different storm attached. I closed the shoe a little to keep the beetle from trying the weather again. Mercy scales poorly, but it does scale. Everyone says she lights up a room. Let me be plain. Amelia rearranged gravity. The room learned to hang differently when she stood in it. The sick months did not remove that talent. They repurposed it. When she was lucid, space settled. Air took its hat off. When she wasn't, the air filled with bees. I learned a beekeeper's patience. I learned that love has to be specific to be any good at all. This mug, this playlist, this sentence finished for her without stealing it. Her phases of interest were passports. I stamped them as faithfully as a border guard, then watched, proud and a little out of breath, as she crossed. She took me with her when she could. Sometimes grief is the realization that your favorite smuggler is being searched at a border you cannot bribe later, on a better day. I pulled the Twin Peaks cap from a box we labeled Normal Things and held it like a relic. She smiled the sideways smile that had recruited me the first time and asked if the owls were still not what they seemed. I said the owls were consultants now and charged by the hour. She laughed, and the rain forgot to knock for a while. That night, after she slept, I made a list of what I could still fix. Replace the rattling vent. Oil the hinge that complained like a cartoon ghost. Throw away the milk that had learned to swear. Dedication should always be rewarded, even if the dedication is to ordinary maintenance, while a larger maintenance, far above my pay grade, rearranged the star map of our days. In the morning, the beetle was gone, the shoe empty, except for a faint scratch line like handwriting. I took it as a blessing, or a note, or just proof that the world contains exits. Sometimes survival is simply the ability to leave a container without an audience. When Amelia woke, I told her about his escape, and she said it sounded like good writing. Then she touched my cheek with calm, collected and dignified fingers, and asked what weather the day had in mind. I told her gray, but the kind we knew how to wear. Grief is a storyteller with perfect timing. It waits until you're out of words, and then offers a few of its own. That night, it spoke in rain, and the rain spoke in second thoughts. I want you to understand who she is, what she means to me, not because memory needs defending, but because otherwise, it would be empty. I want you to understand who she is, what she means to me, not because memory needs defending, but because otherwise, it would be empty. I want you to understand who she is, what she means to me, not because memory needs defending, but because otherwise, it would be empty. I want you to understand who she is, what she means to me, not because memory needs defending, but because otherwise, I fear my decision-making will look like a stranger, wore my face, and signed my name. That first month involved a lot of pent-up emotions on my end and stoic optimism on hers. She built a quiet harbor for the storm and then stood in it without flinching. She was always a spiritual person. No mailing address for any god, just a steady trust that the powers that be kept their own ledgers. I had a more primitive theology. Keep her safe. Keep her laughing. Keep the dread from learning our home address. But dread has GPS. It found us anyway. Countless days spent watching her muscles weaken, her cognitive abilities grow worse, and her memory falter. I learned a new diction for love. Sticky notes, pill boxes, a voice softened to the pitch of comfort. Never did I think I'd be telling my 32-year-old wife that I was her husband and not an intruder she needed to fear, nor a teacher coming to discipline her. Some evenings, we made it to bedtime with the same names we'd woken with. Other evenings, the world rearranged its furniture when I wasn't looking. Those nights were the hardest. The ones where the room wore a different face every 20 minutes, and the clock rehearsed endurance. I slipped out one evening when her diazepam had knocked her out for the night, and while sobbing in the car, punching my steering wheel as the heavy rain muffled my screams, I tried to make a bargain with air. If you give me one ordinary morning, I will pay double for the night. Air doesn't do loans. And then I remembered the card. It lived where bad ideas and desperate hopes go to breathe. The inside pocket of a coat I hadn't earned. Black, with red velvet letters that danced off the beautifully crafted stationery. A small lotus flower on one side, a painted skull on the other. The stock felt like regret. Too nice for my fingers. Across the top. Do you want more time? An address. A name that felt like it wanted to be spoken in a whisper. Dr. D. D's Life Extension Service. A proud subsidiary of St. Martin's Hospital. And a motto with a seal that made it look legal enough to get past the guards in my head. Moments are finite, but memories are infinite. I laughed. One dry syllable that didn't make it past my teeth. Who doesn't? Who doesn't want more time, like the thirstiest man wants an ocean? But the question didn't feel like a billboard. It felt like the beetle in the shoe from the other day. Small, intentional, impossible to ignore without lying. I wiped my face, free of tears, and looked toward the dark house where she slept, where our wonderful wife life was paused, not ended. And I did the most ridiculous calculus a man can do. I weighed fear against love and pretended the scale was real. I called her mother, asked her to keep watch, lied about a pickup for Amelia's new meds, and felt the lie drag an anchor through my ribs. It's funny what you focus on when the world falls around you. The click of wipers, the way rainwater collects at the hood's edge, and then leaps like impatient acrobats, the smell of upholstery that never learned to forgive. I did not think about consequences. I thought about mourning. She was always a woman with two sides to herself. The calm, collected, and dignified side she lent to strangers, and the loud, cunning, wildfire side that made a library out of our kitchen. I told myself this was for both of them. I told myself I could carry the cost if it meant renting another sunrise. I told myself a lot of things because the truth was shaped like a cliff, and cliffs don't negotiate. I took the card out again. Let the red velvet letters have their say. Moments are finite, but memories are infinite. The line was a good liar. Memories are not infinite. They are finite that pretend well. They fade at the edges. They yellow. They misquote you. But they are also the only currency you can spend after the store closes. I decided I would counterfeit if I had to. I decided I would buy back 1 hour, even if the receipt came with teeth. At home, the house had filed itself under quiet. I could hear the house thinking, pipes settling into their old aches, the refrigerator preaching its low sermon. I stood in the doorway to our room and watched her sleep the way you watch the ocean from a safe distance, recognizing both mercy and undertow. She trusted in the powers that be. I trusted in directions and addresses. Somewhere, a man in a converted shipping container waited to sell me a sentence that started with if. It's a simple thing. To walk out of your own life for a while. Keys, wallet, the kind of jacket you can apologize in. One more look at her hair, tied into blonde and pink sometime months ago. The color had softened, but the statement remained. She once told me she chose those colors because they looked like the idea of dawn. I decided I would bring her a dawn she didn't have to die. I turned the card over. A small lotus flower, rebirth to some, a warning to others. A painted skull, honesty's logo. I don't know why symbols work. They just do. They gather your scattered bravery and stack it into something that looks like a plan. I pulled the door to, without letting it click. Texted her mother the exact lie a good son-in-law would tell, and jetted off into the night that had been practicing its darkness just for me. On the way, I rehearsed a future where the question on the card was the answer to hours. I pictured 30 mornings where she cut her bonsai tree in peace, 30 afternoons where she spends time with her lizards and not with pain, 30 evenings where the word death forgot how to pronounce itself. I did not picture the bill. Love is bad at spreadsheets. The rain battered the windows of the car the way it had battered our house. And for a few generous miles, I let myself believe in a world that owed me one. The lane markers flashed by like checkpoints on a race course, and I told myself checkpoints meant progress, not just measurement. When the road split and the sign with its dancing names appeared in the headlights, I felt something unclench in my spine. Somewhere east, a man with a ledger would ask me what I was willing to pay. I would tell him everything, because at that hour, everything had the decency to feel like an honest number. I pressed the card to the steering wheel as if it were a compass, and I were the kind of man who knew how to follow one. The motto burned a hole in the dark. Moments are finite, but memories are infinite. I said it aloud and tasted the lie and the truth inside it. Twin seeds under the tongue. Then I drove. The trip was a blur. Some roads feel like they're driving you. I spent the entire time with fingers drumming the steering wheel to a beat only I could hear, letting the rain keep time on the roof. Headlights made mile markers into little checkpoints on a race course. The night leveling its voice to talk me into courage. A sign leapt out of the dark like a verdict. Myopic Road, south. Sturgeon Central, northwest. Dr. D. D's life extension service, east, 2 miles. The place waited where maps hesitate. A converted shipping container in a lot that remembered crowds, the way scars remember knives. Rust still steadily overtook the sides of the structure, white paint interspersed with bright red lettering and a neon sign that refused to get tired. The door itself was a riddle, a splinterless wooden material with black and gold patterns swirling in on themselves, pooling at a peephole and a heavy knocker. I raised it. The door answered first. A man grinned behind a pair of circular sunglasses and a modified plague mask. "Ah, you're here for the pierogi?" Even his joke had good posture. Cinnamon and ginseng followed him like polite ghosts. "Of course you're not," he said to my stammer. "Nobody is ever here for the pierogi anymore." He waved me inside with the confidence of a maitre d' serving thunderstorms. "I know what you're here for. Mr. Lambert, come on in and sit in any seat you like." The room was half apothecary, half backstage. Shelves carried bottles with colors that didn't exist yesterday. He muttered to himself, "No, not that one. Maybe this?" And then, without turning, asked, "What is your spouse's affliction?" It took work to make my mouth treasonous. "Glioblastoma, stage 4. She has at best 3 months." The words tasted like rust. He held a beaker up so the light could have its say. Some glisten happening behind those lenses. "What makes your wife happiest?" I tried the tourist answers: gelato, storms, travel brochures. He was kind enough to be impatient. "This only works if I really understand your connection, so humor me." So I told him. Mornings that arrive without knives. The first precious minutes or hours before sickness overwhelms her. Pruning bonsai in peace, spending time with her lizards. The luxury of forgetting the word decline. And the other truth that cut cleaner than the first. It was the prospect of becoming a mother. He closed his rummaging and opened a book heavy enough to make the table adjust. A thick leather tome with pages that seemed to listen. He set it between us like a witness. Needle. A tiny bite at my finger. "Last question. What scares you?" "Jasper?" My answer didn't need polishing. "Nothing, except for losing her before we're ready." He smiled where his cheekbones made it visible. Then he turned the page to show the life extension contract. The clause that mattered did not know how to whisper. "Once you sign on that dotted line, you will fear everything." His tone became a ledger. "If you wish to extend Amelia's life, you will give up your sense of security. This contract lasts for 1 month, and during that time, she will feel reinvigorated and will appear well. But once you reach the 30th day, she will deteriorate once more, and your time will be up. That should be enough time to sort out your affairs. But if it's not, well, we can renegotiate." I thought about the price of fear. I'd already been paying retail. The book had a place for my name, and my name walked over and sat down. I signed, and he snapped the book shut, the sound like a curtain dropping. For a heartbeat, he seemed taller, the room an inch smaller. My body was a museum for new sweats. His hidden smile climbed again, and he handed me a vial of blue liquid. "Good. Our contract has begun, and this is what you'll need. Simply add it into whatever Amelia drinks or eats, and you'll see results within the hour. While you'll feel the effects immediately, hers will not start until after ingestion. I'll even be kind and wait until she's eaten it to start the month. The man loved mercy the way a chef loves plating, but only if you take my pierogi recipe. He lifted a finger, as if proposing a toast to his own joke. It shouldn't have mattered, but fear will measure anything. I heard myself ask, "What's in the recipe?" He laughed from somewhere warmer than the room. Oh, that'd be telling," he sang, wagging a finger like a metronome for secrets. I watched the blue, how it kept its own weather inside the glass. What would I lose if I gained her mornings? The arithmetic was bad and irresistible. Somewhere, a month had already started to lace up its shoes. He slid the vial of blue liquid across the table again, as if distance made decisions easier. I palmed it like a relic, like a dare. The label was plain. No skulls, no warnings, just a color that meant ocean to some, police lights to others. To me, it meant a room at dawn, with her shoulder warm against mine, and nothing trying to steal it. The ledger in front of us waited. The ink of my name not yet dry. The clause about renegotiate hanging in the air like an exit sign. I could feel the contract looking at me, trying on my shape. The doctor, D, tilted his masked head, listening to something I couldn't hear, then nodded as if a choir had reached a chord it liked. "You understand," he said, not as a question. I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded the way the desperate nod, like a man agreeing with gravity. I stood, and the room did not approve. The black and gold patterns on the door pulsed once, an ornament with a heartbeat. I pretended not to notice, the way you pretend not to see a friend weeping in public because you know the story, and you know it wants to finish itself. He escorted me to the threshold with a politeness that felt ceremonial. Cinnamon and ginseng again. A curtain call for the senses. Behind me, the thick leather tome settled into its place with the resigned authority of a judge's chair. "You'll want to move quickly," he said, voice mild, as though we'd just picked out a tie. "Some months wear spikes." I slipped the vial into the inner pocket over my heart, where it felt heavier than glass should be. Maybe weight is what hope does when you give it a container. I reached for the knocker instinctively, as if you can knock on the outside when you're leaving the inside. Then stopped, half embarrassed by ghost etiquette. He pretended not to notice, which is a form of kindness. Outside, the lot still remembered how to be empty. The neon sign buzzed like an insect that had learned a hymn, and the sky had gone from rain black to something closer to ink in the car. I held the vial to the dome light. The blue made a small cathedral of the cab. I thought of the first precious minutes or hours when this might work, how her shoulders would lower from around her ears, how the air would stop keeping secrets for a while. Fear everything, the clause had said. I already knew how. Back inside, D rearranged something on a shelf with the deliberate ease of a man who had all the time in the world and still chose to be precise. "Do me a favor," he called softly through the door, as if he'd heard the engine decide. "Don't look for omens that aren't yours. The month will have enough of its own." The door closed the way a book closes on a finger that almost learned. The threshold exhaled as I reached for it, a soft draft from a room that had just eaten my signature. Some doors keep a little of you when you pass. He wagged his finger and said goodbye as I hurried for the door. The black void outside, no more inviting than his workshop of horrors. The lot was an erased page, and I was the pen that wouldn't stop scratching. I told myself the dark was only weather. The dark told me otherwise. What unseen monsters lurked in the dark, waiting to get me? The question did not need an answer to do its work. Even as I ran to the car some 30 feet away, I felt invisible hands reach out to grab at my shirt, pull at my ankles, and tear at my skin, just for a bite of my flesh. The night had a mouth and a hunger. I chose speed, but they never caught up. No, I'm too fast for that. Bravado is a thin blanket, but it kept me moving. I fell into the driver's seat like a confession and let the dome light paint the vial in cathedral blue. The glass felt heavier than its size, as if it contained not liquid, but minutes. 30 of them lined up behind one another, waiting to be spent. I started the engine and watched the clinic shrink in the rear mirror until it became a rumor. The road unwound ahead. Wet, reflective, a ribbon someone had tried to iron and failed. I drove the way you do after a decision, jaw set, future narrowed to 2 hands on a wheel, and a breath you keep counting so you won't stop taking it. Street signs blinked their indifference. My mantra did not change anything but me, which was enough to keep the tires honest. I locked my doors and raced home with the kind of urgency that makes every block feel longer by law. The neighborhood was asleep, or pretending well. Windows were gray, with the secret light of appliances. Fear likes to narrate. It listed the small vulnerabilities of a house as if reading me bedtime stories backwards. I let the car settle, counted to a number that felt safe, then went for the porch. Triple bolts sing 3 notes when you throw them in sequence. I gave the door its song. The hallway received me like a church after hours. No choir, just acoustics. I did a perimeter, the way I'd seen soldiers do on television. Fingers on latches, eyes on corners, listening for a hinge that might betray a second life. The night had left fingerprints on the glass, or maybe that was weather learning to sign its name. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed its long sermon. I set the vial down on the counter and watched the blue pulse under the ceiling light. What do you call hope when it's measurable by the teaspoon? I rinsed a glass without letting the water get too loud, as if noise could break whatever clock the doctor had promised me he would not start until she swallowed. The orange in the carton looked ordinary, which felt like alchemy given the hour my soul was keeping. A tremor in the window sent my eyes to the backyard. Just branches trading gossip with the air. I poured the juice, unstoppered the vial, and tilted sky into citrus. The swirl went cobalt, then sunset, then a color that didn't have a name in any house I'd lived in. I stirred with the care I reserve for her bonsai, for the delicate life I am always trying not to jostle. I imagined the first precious minutes or hours tomorrow, her voice arriving without the static, her shoulders lowering from their permanent shrug, the sentence she loved to finish, finally finding its own ending. I stood there, longer than the moment required. The kitchen clock argued with my heart about tempo. I set the glass on her nightstand and sat in the chair that has learned the weight of my vows. I am not brave. I am a man with a task. Outside, the world rehearsed the next kind of darkness. Inside, a small moon floated in a glass, promising a weather change. Here's to hoping I didn't just purchase a miracle with a currency I can never earn back. Morning arrived, wearing someone else's face. Pretty, distant, a little too bright. Some days step through the door like a guest. Others kick it in and rename the house. Clear skies, exposing a scorching sun. Bright rays seeping through the window. A soft breeze bringing the smell of barbecues and log fires on the wind. The air tasted like someone else's holiday. By the lake, a witness descended. A crane bird flies down to take a drink. A thin red wound worked at its throat, pushing at the slit to get free. Beauty with an edit mark. It feels like it's looking at me. Behind it, a sea of black clouds roll in, bringing with them a sense of intense dread. And still, the heart refused to be talked out of shining. Then the house learned a new verb, the door being kicked in. Fear arrives loud before it arrives true. A deafening boom shattered something private in me, sent my heart into overdrive. A lightning thought of social workers and clipboards coming to take me away from Amelia. Or worse, take Amelia to a home, away from my care, to die alone and afraid. I pivoted, already halfway to a plea, and saw my attacker. Instead, I saw Amelia. She stood there, like an exclamation the page had been saving. She's fully dressed, dungarees with one strap down, exposing a colorful polka dot top, her beautiful hair cascading down her shoulders, the tops of her fringe held up by a pair of oversized goggles. Gustav the chameleon rode shotgun like a green apostle. In her hands, plastic salvation, a Nerf gun pointed directly at me. She grinned a grin with grass-stained knees. Wake up, maggot. The sun is shining, and it's time for a Nerf war. It's a new day. Yes, it is. The room, traitor that it is, laughed with her. My ribs relearned the idea of expanding. I answered the only way a man should when joy shows up armed. I grabbed our battered blaster and counted, referee and fool, while she bolted barefoot down the hall. The floorboards clapped for her. The house breathed differently when she ran, lighter, like the walls had taken off their coats. I hunted through our familiar rooms and found unfamiliar shapes. The coat rack had grown crueler overnight. A tall facsimile of a man with arms pulling at his own spine. Jagged feet stuck out as if the floor were a net. The settling creaks and groans sounded like something with a stomach problem, praying for an audience. When fear moves in, furniture rehearses. New rolls, a bulbous shape, giggled from behind the curtain. A carnival lump that didn't belong to architecture. My hand reached for the fabric, and doubt reached for my back. A sting, a yelp behind me. I spun just in time to see Amelia lowering the blaster, laughter swimming in her eyes, sprint already loading into her legs. I turned back. The curtain remembered how to be a curtain. "Hey," she said, a thumb at my brow. "You okay?" The grin gentled into weather I recognized. I nodded, then shook my head, then realized how useless both gestures are when you're busy drowning. So I did the only smart thing. I pulled her in and let my forehead learn her shoulder again. She smelled like clean cotton, and small victories, the room stopped leaning. Fear retreated to the attic to count itself. We ended the truce the way people in love do, by cheating the score and calling it even. She holstered the blaster beneath a smile, and I made a joke that wasn't very good, but had great timing. The sun tapped the window, impatient with our blinds, and the house relaxed into day. A day that looked suspiciously like a gift I hadn't paid for yet. "Let's enjoy it," she said. And something in me said yes before my mouth did. I watched the light write her name across the floorboards. Watched Gustav blink like a tiny lighthouse on her shoulder. I watched the clock forget how to threaten. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask why the world had decided to return her to herself. Bright and brave and boyish with mischief. She just claimed the new day with both hands the way she always had. When the river lets you back onto the bank, you don't interrogate the current. You wring your clothes and plan lunch. We staged the house for play the way surgeons stage a theater. Carefully, deliberately, with rituals that look like superstition but are really love in a lab coat. I tucked away the sharp corners, moved the coffee table 2 inches left and 3 inches kind, pretended it had always lived there. She checked the goggles, saluted Gustav, and promised not to shoot the plants. I promised nothing and lied. We took our corners. The world held its breath. She popped her head from behind the bookcase, stuck out her tongue like a signature, and vanished again. A little comet with a plait. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard announced that it was ready to be surprised. From the doorframe, the lake glinted, the crane still down by the edge, throat working at its secret. The black clouds in the foreground thickened, but the sun's presence would not be denied. I understood. Some dread is weather. Some warmth is doctrine. I felt a sentence rise in my chest with the old taste of prayer. She was better. It worked. I pushed innate fears down into my core and dressed them in patience. Terror can be trained to sit, but it never learns to heal. I told myself joy had called a truce, so I should meet her halfway. I leapt out of bed, grabbing a Nerf gun and granting a 30-second head start, like I was merciful and not already 29 in my bones. Not. I heard her dash away, bare feet slapping against the cedar flooring, and the house applauded with soft wood hands. Love, at its core, is the trick of feeling perpetually young while the calendar looks away. Within a few seconds, the house fell silent. Silence is only quiet if you trust it. I swept the rooms like a late-night DJ, hunting for a clean track, and the home I'd shared with her began to remix itself. Maybe it was the lack of natural lighting. Maybe the debt I'd signed had come to collect, traipsing through the house and spying any vantage points. I found our living room redrawn by a cruel architect, a coat rack shaped like a twisted, elongated facsimile of a man, his arms pulling at his own spine, a mannequin arrested in time mid-scream. The creaks and groans of the house settling no longer meant lumber. They were the grumblings of a stomach old as a cemetery, ancient, malignant, working its jaw around us. I stood where the floorboards remembered every dance we'd ever tried, and saw imposing structures and shapes where thrift store furniture used to stand. But it was the shape behind the curtains that caught my attention most, bulbous and plump. It danced behind the fabric and invited me to investigate further, beckoning me with giggles punctuated with wheezes. Joy plays, dread imitates. The sound was wrong, like a child's laugh dubbed over a wildlife documentary. The lump in my throat threatened to choke me from the tension. But ritual is a kind of armor. I measured my breath, took the 3 steps that divide husband from hunter, and hand outstretched to grab the fabric and yank it aside. A man about to uncover either prank or omen. The house tilted, the air cooled, and the curtain swelled like a lung that had learned to lie. Then impact. A sting braided to a joke. A sharp pang in my back, and howling laughter from behind me. I turned, and there she was. Amelia doubled over, Nerf Queen, triumph bright on her mouth as she ran off, daring me to catch her. It should have dispelled everything. It didn't. I faced the window again, and the curtain had returned to its normal shape. But the normal was counterfeit. My nerves had learned a new alphabet and were eager to read. I stayed there, arrested by fabric, listening as the house rehearsed breath, creaks and groans, the old settling hymn of lumber, now speaking fluent appetite. Once you sign for more time, even air has fine print. I kept moving, because motion is the cheapest spell. The cedar flooring reported my position to whatever eavesdropped. I began to see the home I'd lived in with her for years in a completely different light, and not the gentle kind of different. The coat rack loomed again in the edge of vision, insisting on its facsimile of a man. Jagged feet stuck out like the trap of a story that wants a body. Don't blink, I told myself, as if eyelids ever obey courage. Jasper? The house borrowed her voice, the way a ventriloquist borrows wood. For a beat, I didn't answer, afraid whatever replied would use my mouth to sign new paperwork. I stood there, dumbfounded for a moment, and felt the tension headache arrive with its briefcase. The sprinting kid inside my chest sat down on the curb and drank air like it was soda. The living room kept trying on faces. Maybe it was the lack of natural lighting. Perhaps I was still tired, but I did not recall there being so many imposing structures and shapes in my living room. Every corner staged a menacing attempt to catch me. Yet nothing moved when watched. Predators prefer the second glance. I forced a grin into the room, the way you wedge a doorstop under a closing door. Truce, I wanted to say. We're playing. This was not my moment to need care and sympathy. This was hers, and she deserved every ounce of it. I holstered the blaster to make my hands look empty. Her steps approached. Amelia walked up to put her hand on my shoulder and the other against my forehead. Her boyish smile faded and was replaced with concern. Hey, you feeling okay? I know that's probably funny for me to ask, but she was sun on a wall of old paint, calm, practical, checking heat like a field medic. I tried a smile made of borrowed parts. Strength is sometimes the refusal to narrate your fear out loud. I thought of the cedar beneath our feet, the bonsai in its morning window, the lizards who believed only in heat and presence, not prognosis. I thought of how love is at its core, feeling perpetually young, and how quickly a curtain can make you old. Got me good, I managed, an answer small enough to carry. She squinted at the curtain, then back at me, the goggles propped in her hair, like parentheses. The room relaxed an inch, as if the house recognized the authority of her pulse. I stood there with my private storm on a leash and let her touch reorder my weather. Terror will always audition for the lead. Tenderness keeps stealing the show. From the lake, the afternoon threw a sparkle across our wall. The bulbous shadow gave up its game. And for a heartbeat, the house remembered it was a house. The curtain had returned to its normal shape. I filed the moment under mercy. Even if the drawer stuck halfway, normal came back wearing a costume. The curtain had returned to its normal shape, but I could still hear the zipper. Peace, when borrowed, never fits right. I stood there, dumbfounded, letting a tension headache open its briefcase on the back of my eyes. Relief and dread are siblings. They share a toothbrush. Footsteps arrived with a temperature check. Amelia walked up to put her hand on my shoulder and the other against my forehead. Her smile practiced mischief, then was replaced with concern. "Hey, you feeling okay? I know that's funny for me to ask, but..." She meant it as a joke. My nerves didn't speak comedy. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep the room from overhearing you break. This was not my moment to need care and sympathy. This was hers, and she deserved every ounce of it. I wanted to be the kind of man whose steadiness made furniture relax. Instead, I was a weather vane with vertigo. She waited, patient as a lighthouse, and I realized the house would keep breathing as long as she did. I pulled her in for a long hug and sobbed into her shoulder, the kind of crying that loosens bolts. She rubbed slow circles between my shoulders, an old prescription renewed, and whispered like a blanket being unfolded. "It's all right. It's really me. I guess these meds worked wonders. Huh? Let's enjoy the time we have. Okay?" Something unclenched. Another thing sharpened. We stood there until the calendar forgot to advance. Gustav blinked from her shoulder like a green metronome keeping time for our lungs. The room's corners lost their teeth. I tried to match her steadiness, to let the word enjoy mean soup and a walk, not bargaining with storms. She pulled back just enough to see my face, thumb under my cheekbone like she was erasing a smudge, only she could see. Then the air changed key. The voice arrived the way mold arrives. Quiet, assured, already deciding where to live. All things crawl into hell's mouth eventually. Jasper, it's just a matter of how much you season the meat first. The syllables were hot and wet in the ear that wasn't being spoken to. The house cooled by 5 degrees. Do not turn. That is the instruction dread always gives you, just before it adds, "Now." A pressure at the side of my head, a trespass that knew the way. Something pushed its way into my ear, hot, slimy, and burning at my flesh, like an apologetic intruder, whispering that the apology counted as consent. I tried to pull free, but the world had been moved 2 inches to the left without my permission. My eyes went down because fear wanted a picture to frame. Her feet, Amelia's feet, the ones I knew by their small choreography across our floors, were not hers. They were decay, rot, and bloated flesh. Barely resembled the maintained and dainty feet of my wife. These were clearly belonging to that of a corpse, the nails yellowing and peeling away from the toes, bone pushing up to the thinning skin with such force it split the flesh. The sight hollowed me like a spoon. This is not real. I told my body, this is the bill for the contract arriving early. My body preferred the evidence. It always does. Before I could press my fingers against the rot to consider my own sanity, the pressure in my ear became a small furnace, and the floor leaned toward me like an usher who'd waited long enough. I clutched at her wrist, at the living temperature of her pulse, at the one faithful measurement left in the room. She said my name, the way people say the name of a country they'll never get to visit again. The house practiced breathing. Creaks and groans rehearsed to sound like mercy. And the window forgot which side of it the light belonged on. I tried to build a barricade out of words. We are here. You are here. The curtain is only fabric. The coat rack is only wood. The Nerf darts are only toys. The blue is only medicine. But the sentence would not hold its shape. The voice at my ear hummed a lullaby in a key I didn't recognize. Season the meat. Season the meat. I thought of the lake, of the crane with a wound on its throat, of the sun that refused to negotiate with clouds. I thought of how joy had kicked the door in this morning, with goggles and a polka dot top and a slogan about a new day. I tried to gather that day in my hands like water and pour it back over us, but the room folded. My knees asked the floor an intimate question. The world narrowed to her name. A hot, slimy tunnel in my skull, and the impression of corpse-belonging feet that were and were not hers. There is a moment in every faint where your body decides it no longer wants your opinion, and then the world faded to blackout. When I next awoke, it was to the darkness of the bedroom and a cold rag on my head. There are rags that clean. There are rags that anoint. This one felt like both. The room held its breath, and so did I. The fan whispered small weather above us, the kind that argues with fever and sometimes wins. Amelia told me I passed out and had a fever, but that she was happy to have the roles switched for once. She said it lightly, like a nurse who keeps her humor in the front pocket with the pen. I couldn't even speak for the pain. Just hearing her talk was enough to soothe me. Her voice was the cup of water you don't know you're asking for until it's against your lips. Eventually the fever would break, not with a trumpet, just a quiet surrender. And I finally allowed the impossible to set in. This morning might be ours. She moved through the dark like she remembered where everything was, even when it wasn't. Cool cloth, warmer hands. She rehearsed tenderness like a hymn she learned before she knew language. I lay there, counting the miles between heartbeats. Grief teaches strange mathematics. Relief is always a fraction. The window held a loneliness I recognized, but the bed had her in it, and that changed the map. Open, she said, and I did. And the spoon arrived with something that tasted like oranges and a promise. The chameleon slept in his glass city, dreaming of warmer branches. The house forgot how to creak for a moment, or else I forgot how to hear it. Good, she said, thumb at my temple, as if congratulating a stubborn door for finally swinging the right way. We traded sentences the way you trade postcards from places you can't afford to visit. She told me I'd scared her, and I told her I was done scaring her for the day. She smiled like a small porch light in weather. I wanted to live under that bulb forever. Time returned cautiously, like a saw that has seen a vacuum. The cold rag warmed. My skin decided I could borrow it again. I began to believe in the bed, in the ceiling, in the specific geography of her shoulder against mine. Outside, tires stitched a faint seam down the street and were gone. Inside, her breath counted to 4 and back again. "Take it easy," she said. And I told her ease was a language I'd let slip. She said she could translate. I laughed, which ached, which made her wince, which made me stop. We apologized for making each other care so hard. That's marriage, when the world leans, little by little. The fever retreated like a tide ashamed of itself. Heat left messages in my joints on the way out, but the worst of it had gathered its coat. I stared at the ceiling fan's slow parade and tried to name each blade after a mercy. Sometimes the body is a rumor. Sometimes it's a room that lets you stay. When the air no longer shimmered, I turned my head and found her watching me the way I watch the sky when weather changes. Hopeful, careful, reading. The light from the hall trimmed her in a cheap halo and made her look like every miracle that never announced itself. I reached for her fingers. She brought them the last inch. For a long moment, we didn't use words because we finally didn't have to. Then I asked the only question I trusted. I didn't dress it up, didn't make it a speech. I asked it the way you ask the sea for a small favor. I asked as a man who had seen the bill and still wanted dessert. I turned toward her and, very quietly, asked what we should do with the portion of life that still had our names on it. She didn't answer at once. She let the room arrive. She measured the air like a tailor. Then she looked at me with the kind of warmth that sets bone, the kind that fits a key into a future and hears it click. She smiled a smile with history in it and said we should treat the hours like a closing sale. We should spend them with both hands. She said we were going to live this time until it squeaked. I believed her. The ceiling fan agreed. Somewhere, a morning cleared its throat. The days lined up like coins on a bar, each one light enough to flick. All of them heavy in a jar. Joy is easy, right, until you notice the tab. So it went. A season of yeses, where the air finally stopped gatekeeping. She woke clear. I exhaled. And the house learned a friendlier grammar. We weren't building a future. We were building a porch. Wide enough to sit on, long enough to watch the weather pass, and call it ours. People love to say carpe diem. We did one better. We taught diem to purr, and somewhere behind it all, a clock took notes with a small, satisfied pen. We made a catalog of the possible. We binged the later series of Twin Peaks and found it wanting. We turned the old cap into a crown and judged plot points like the show had borrowed our couch without asking. We traveled to the edge of Sturgeon after hearing rumors of the best damn gelato you'll get in this or any other dimension. She chose 2 flavors that sounded like dares. I chose the one that tasted like childhood and paperwork. We evened our Nerf war score and vowed the war would continue on. The living room became a battlefield where the deadliest thing was our laughter. We also practiced the quiet arts. We loved unconditionally and without fear of what came after. A sentence that felt like a church you could actually pray in. I pushed innate fears down into my core and let the corners of my eyes go politely out of focus. As I got more comfortable, I could deny all the things at the corners of my vision, the night terrors that woke me, the small things protruding from every single crack or crevice to mock me. Denial, when shared, feels like faith. We picked a playlist that knew when to be quiet, learned how to nap like professionals, and invented rules for a world where contentment mattered more than prognosis. We set small pilgrimages on the map. The animal shelter with the dogs who forgive faster than saints. The bonsai shop where she asked the tiny trees permission to keep going. The lake path where cranes pretended not to be omens. She told me the best way to keep time is to ignore it publicly and love loudly in front of witnesses. I believed her. I had evidence. Then the calendar cleared its throat. Then, on the morning of the 30th day, she began slurring her words. I heard it first as a joke mispronounced, and then not a joke. I watched the syllables stumble like furniture in a dark room. By the afternoon, her balance was waning, and she fell into my arms some inches from the doomed coffee table that her skull collided with previously. I thanked gravity for remembering us. When dinner came around, she forgot how to cook a steak and nearly burned herself, the pan shouting, the kitchen suddenly full of weather. Shame written across her face as she slumped away to bed and cried. We went to bed anyway, because habit is also a kind of medicine. As the night gave way to dawn, and we reached day 31, she had a seizure. No siren this time, no audience, just the dream shattered. And we were once again back where we started, only poorer for having tasted the better version. Now, with the added pain of what could have been ripped away to expose a fresh and sensitive wound. I counted breaths. I named every piece of furniture Mercy and begged them to live up to it. I watched the toll take shape on her. I looked at her in bed, a fragile thing, with her face looking closer to 42 than 32, as her body tried and failed to fight off the damage being wrought from within. The math was getting worse by the hour. She was decaying before my very eyes, and the house went back to breathing the old way. Door slam, errant tree branch looking like a malformed fist. Strange thing floating in my eye. Fear didn't need to knock. It had a key. There was no other option. You have to understand that. I told myself this until the sentence felt like a rail to grip. I had to go back to D, and renegotiate the extension plan. I said the words aloud in a room that knew all my other words and judged none of them. If it means giving Amelia more time, anything was. I pulled on a jacket like armor, and the night obliged by becoming a war. It didn't matter that every tree on my frantic drive there seemed to lean forward, making the highway a tunnel of bark with an appetite. It didn't matter that whispers that had been lingering in my ears for weeks were now subdued shrieks and threats of what will happen if I continue to ignore them. My name was suddenly a summons. It didn't matter that something was hiding behind every single telephone pole, and I was catching more of its shape with every glance behind me as the road thinned out. The poles tallied me as I passed. The wires sang a score the radio didn't know. Terror narrated. I drove anyway. I kept one mantra, because I only had room for one. All that matters is Amelia. I repeated it until the steering wheel believed me. I repeated it until the night sky gave up trying to sell me stars I couldn't afford. When the lane narrowed and the shoulder pretended to be a cliff. I remembered the blue vial's glow in our kitchen, and the way morning had once arrived dressed in her voice. Back at the house, earlier, the contentment that had moved in like a good tenant was gone, replaced with a notice on the door. Inside my head, a clerk stamped the same form over and over. Overdue. 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 I argued with a god I don't believe in, bargained with a king I hadn't met yet, and negotiated against the one enemy that refuses a counteroffer: the bill. Grief is a store that closes at random hours. Love is the manager who keeps letting you in through the side door. I remembered the war we had promised to continue, and understood the joke, finally. We had been fighting time with toys. I kissed her temple, cooler now, like the tide had taken the heat and left the sand. I told her a lie, that we'd be fine. I told her a truth, that I would suffer whatever the world hurls at me for her. Both sentences tasted like metal, driving. I could deny nothing now. The road performed a horror show just for me. Every tree a leaning witness, every shade a threat practicing its lines. The car's clock did its small, cruel arithmetic. I avoided the mirror. I didn't want to see what followed, lives just off the shoulder. If you stare too long at the chorus, you forget the solo. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles rehearsed bones. I said the mantra again and again. All that matters is Amelia, and let the engine do what engines do when men are foolish and in love. Somewhere ahead, a man in a mask kept ledgers in a thick leather tome and brewed mercy like tea. Somewhere ahead, a door with black and gold patterns waited to decide what another month might cost. You'd do the same in my shoes, right? That's what I asked the windshield, as the telephone poles counted me like rosary beads, even if the next 3 months were hell. I didn't wait for an answer. The road gave me one anyway. The weather arrived with a bad attitude. Hail like thrown teeth. Sky stamps that shook nails in the frame. There are months that knock. This one tried the handle. Hail spits from the skies, and thunder claps sound like great oaks crashing around my home. A percussion set built for panic. Out in the yard, something studied itself. A loop inside a loop. I see a snake in the underbrush outside of my yard, biting on his tail. The day had opinions about endings. I called my father because I wanted permission to keep being unreasonable. He gave me love instead. I call my dad, and after some profuse apologies for the late night inconvenience, he agrees to watch over Amelia while I go to renegotiate. That's the word I used. Renegotiate. Like grief were a landlord with office hours. He arrived with the old kindness in his face. A tired lighthouse that still knew how to aim. In our living room, we left our shoes beside the same rug that had taught us to dance and to pace. He sipped water, weighed 20 ways to say the same mercy, then tried 3 of them. Son, if you need to go somewhere to, blow off some steam. He caught himself on the soft edge of the phrase. Man shouldn't watch his true love go like this. Not so soon. I know, Dad, but I know she can beat this. She can get better, even just for a little while. He looked at me the way carpenters look at a bowed plank, measuring how far hope can bend without snapping. Jasper, when it's time, it's time. I got some pamphlets, Kubler-Ross, and all that. I know what stage I'm at. I'm at the stage of doing whatever it takes to make that woman as comfortable as possible for as long as possible. Are you gonna help me? Or not? Silence. The house listened in. He crossed the room the way men cross rivers they used to jump, and pulled me into a hug that knew my first name and my worst day. I get it, kid. A man's business is his own. Do what you gotta do, and come back here to help that amazing little lady. His forehead rested against mine like an oath. Then the kitchen decided it had a role to play. From the doorway, I watched the divider connecting the living room to my kitchen. Felt the air narrow. The fridge door opening. Why are there teeth in my fridge? No. Wait. It's a mouth. A bright red mouth, tongue rolling out and exposing a fiery pit in the impossible blackness. The voice that came out wore gravel and judgment. This is where it all ends, Jasper. Your defiance has consequences. The room froze around the sentence. Dad, a photograph, air a museum piece. I heard my own voice try on armor. Amelia will never go to such an ugly place. I won't allow it. It laughed with a dry animal joy. A hoarse, reptilian cackle, the kind that makes your molars feel witnessed. The fridge mouth forms a head around it. Red eyes and black fur with piercing fangs. Small, spectral shapes funnel into the mouth, herded by a hand I could not see. It is not her who shall venture into the jaws of the beast, but you. She will watch your body crush in its mighty jaws. The words were a map to a place your shoes cannot survive. Fight or flight isn't a choice. It's a coin toss you pretend to call. I closed my eyes, holding my dad like a rope in a flood, and prayed to the thing I don't believe in, but always address. It's for Amelia. I will suffer whatever the world hurls at me for her. I counted back from 10. A civilian spell. She will die alone and afraid, kicking and screaming. You will never know how scared she was. Why? Because that's what will hurt you the most. The breath from the thing felt hot, fetid, a stew of rot, lard, and sage. Horror has favorite herbs. My skin tried to leave without me. I opened my eyes into my dad's kind eyes. A moment hadn't passed for him. The scene clicked back into place, like the world had only coughed. He saw whatever men see when they are spared the subtitle track. I backed away, nodded gratitude I couldn't spend, and gathered my edges. I'm gonna check in on her once more before I go. I said it to him, and to the room, and to whatever still tasted like smoke. In the half-light, Amelia slept the way good people do, like they are not being graded. Small chest rising and falling rhythmically as her eyes fluttered. I stood there to borrow a little of that rhythm, to remind Marrow what a steady tempo feels like. In the kitchen, when I glanced back, because you always glance back, the fridge was obedient hardware again, save for a small line running down the door, looking not dissimilar to a claw mark. Proof or permission? I couldn't say. On the way out, I did what men do when they can't fix the headline. They fix the margins. I straightened a frame, turned off a light the storm didn't need, placed her glass closer to her hand. My father's shoulder was there like an off-ramp. The night in the windows talked about giant footsteps tentatively growing closer. But I told the night it could wait its turn. The mantra returned, familiar and feral. For her, for her, for her. I put on my coat, and the house put on its old breath. A man's business is his own, he'd said. But this felt larger than business. This felt like translation, taking love and rendering it intelligible to whatever runs the clocks in the dark. At the door, the hail had softened into a percussion the roof could bear. The snake in the yard had disappeared, or had learned to be quiet about its appetite. I chose to believe in quiet. I chose to believe in doors that open and close when asked. I chose, again, that this could still be a story with another page. The mind will build you a raft out of anything. Vinyl records, half-remembered trivia, a voice that isn't yours, talking for 3 hours about something you'll never need. Coping isn't pretty. It floats. I found coping mechanisms as time went on to deal with the majority of my anxieties. Playlists that knew where the ache lived. Shows where strangers confessed into microphones so I didn't have to. Sturgeon loves its music. The town believes a chorus can turn a wound into choreography. Music and podcasts tended to be where my mind gravitated towards. And on nights, the walls got teeth. I turned the volume into a moat, which is how I ended up pounding on a door in a converted shipping container, rain in my collar, and a prayer in my mouth. It's open, Jasper. Let yourself in. I'm a little preoccupied right now. Preoccupied turned out to mean a strange, writhing beast tied to a table, and a man in a plague mask, humming like he'd found the right spice. I stepped inside, and the room hissed at me. A strange, writhing beast with beady black eyes, a barbed tongue, a mass of red fur, small but powerful limbs fastened to the table. D looked up, cheekbones smiling, circular lenses fogged with his heavy breaths. He reached under the table, stabbed the creature in the chest with a hypodermic needle, and pushed the plunger until the wheeze turned into a lullaby. Don't mind Meridew here. He's been rather uncooperative. Another bottle, another pour. Get him back to where he belongs. In his cozy enclosure at the Dusklight Circus, my voice arrived without me. Why? He heard it and answered the larger why. Sometimes those who feel wronged may make a pact with a creature that feeds off of negative energy until it eats the husk. Those people are dicks. He pried the jaws, poured a thick gunk down his gullet, and tucked a sleeping cap over its eyes, as if apology were part of anesthesia. Sit, he said, and the chair obeyed. On the desk, the great ledger from last time lay open, indentations of clientele and number, a concoction in bold letters beside each name. Also, I wanted to see how your life with fear was faring with you. I take it you want to extend the deal? Jasper? I nodded. Unsteady legs took me to the chair, and I watched how the supermoon bled its yellow into the window like an accusation. He ran a finger down the page, found my name, tapped it like a judge tapping wood. Jasper. I'm but a simple cook and problem fixer. Some call it dark magic or potion selling, but all I offer is time, temporary time. He didn't sit yet. He circled the room like the idea of a moon. Is she worth it? Jasper? Is this what she would want? he asked softly. I felt my back stand up by itself. She's worth everything. The room agreed by not arguing. He exhaled. They've started talking to you, haven't they? His voice lost its lacquer. You're becoming a conductor for them, and they're only going to get stronger and bolder the longer you're aware of them. You know? I shot back the only vow I had left. I don't care. They can't have Amelia. They never will. He shook his head. Jasper, they're not coming to take her away because she's dying. They're not body snatchers. They're coming for you because you're now a threat to them. He reached for a small book, thumbed pages until a photograph stared at me. A towering man, a helm made of bone and gold, a toga, a myriad of faces fixed along his torso, expressions of pain, pleasure, and rage. You took something from their king, something he was owed. I swallowed. Who? Nurgle, god king of the sunset and ruler of one of the underworlds of pestilence. The room decided to be colder. He has sent his followers after you to protect his standing. People are not supposed to defy the natural order. Jasper, he closed the small book, opened the thick leather tome, and set a needle on a velvet pad. Make sure this is what you want, because to extend it again, I will need to take your sense of ignorance. I will make you see more of what you're not supposed to see. The words felt like removing eyelids. Will I be safe? My throat was a dry hinge. He let the cheekbones smile. No, but you'll be happy. Isn't that the point? From a pocket, he produced a charm, old and heavy, a weathered disc that felt like gravity. So long as you keep this on you, they will not be able to physically harm you. Everything else is up to you. I took the charm and felt the room gain one mercy and lose another. He watched my hands shake and kept talking like a doctor scolding weather. 60 days. That's all I can give you. I started to speak. 2 months. But because by the end of it, come hell or high water, you will beg me to cease the contract. He tapped the ledger like a man timing bread. He wanted me to come back in 1 month to check in, to see whether sanity had grown moss. With any luck, you'll want to end things early. I recognized hope dressed as math and signed anyway. I signed before he could finish. Name dragging a shadow across the page. The light changed at the window, a sickly green pulse that made the glass feel like a drum. He noticed me notice it. Do me a favor, he began, and the sentence hung there like a coat waiting for its owner. I thought about what the terms meant. My ignorance pawned, my fear accruing interest. See more of what you're not supposed to see. I thought about beady black eyes, about barbed tongue, about red fur, and the baking club feud he'd hinted at, as if life outside the veil still kept its petty wars. I thought about the photo, bone and gold, the faces fixed, and whether a king of sunset ever tired of closing. I thought about happiness, like a storm you agree to stand under, because the rain is her laugh, coming back to you. Explain it to me, I said, not because I needed more reason, but because I wanted to hear him say the cost in a voice that wasn't mine. He obliged. Fear is a sense organ, he said. When I take your ignorance, I sharpen it. You will hear what you shouldn't, taste what the old books tried to shelve, You'll learn there are towns behind this one that wear our streets like a costume. I'm giving you a charm to keep your skin yours. The rest of you will be very, very available. I looked down at the disc. Old etchings, like a map to a door I didn't have a house for, and looped the cord over my neck. It sat against my sternum, like a verdict. Somewhere in the back of the room, Meridew snored a closed-throat snore, dreaming of a cozy enclosure that didn't have a man with a ledger. What about Amelia? I asked, because every sentence I own is a question with her name inside it. You already know, he said, and it wasn't unkind. You can't fix the ending, but you can decorate the last 2 rooms. He set the vial on the table between us again. Not blue this time, but the same grief cobalt as before, like a lake you could drown in politely. I signed the extension in a hand steadier than it had any right to be. The book snapped shut with a small clap of finality, and the air got interested in itself. The light emanating from the window pulsed again, sickly green, and he stared through it like a man listening to a choir in a locked cathedral. There are other kings, he murmured, almost to himself, and other seasons, but this one has your name. He squared the ledger, squared the bottles, squared the distance between us until it felt correct. Then he said the thing that mattered and left the rest in the air for next time. When you leave, he began, remember you asked for weather. He gave me weather for a warning. Do me a favor, Jasper. Don't look at the moon. Some advice wears velvet and still cuts. I asked him what he saw when he did. He didn't blink. Everything. That single word weighed the room. He added a benediction for cowards like me. Good luck, Jasper. Do watch your step on the way out. Our guest might wake up. The guest on the table twitched like a bad dream changing sides. I decided to borrow his confidence and pay him later. Pocketed charm, palmed fear, door outside. The world had put on a sickly green the way hospitals put on light. Efficient, unkind. I did what children do with dares. Don't look became a magnet. I held my sight low. Gravel. Puddles. The paint-flaked threshold, and let the neon buzz write an alibi for my eyes. The air felt rehearsed, as though the town had practiced being a different town, and tonight got its cue. I reached the car without taking the sky's bait, the charm at my sternum, a small, obedient thunder. The engine settled into its patience. I drove by instrument and superstition. The radio woke itself and tried to be helpful. The night sky, the glow was good for the skin, especially when naked. They suggested we should all be naked in its magnificent glow and, if possible, grab other people to do it too. The words blurred to static, like they'd been edited for decency by a god with bad reception. I hit power. Silence moved in like a paying tenant on the bend back toward home. Something kept pace with my headlights. Something slithering away from my view. Scaly limbs pushing a sleek body quickly out of sight. Predators love the edge of frame. I named it later and let the tires vote for now. The house met me with polite shadows. The porch light did its small miracle. Ordinary gold on ordinary wood. Inside, my dad had the look of a man who knows how to be useful. He agrees to watch over Amelia while I go to renegotiate. He smiled the old smile and handed me a report card of calm. I smiled back with the wrong muscles because I didn't tell him that something was latched to his neck, worming its way through his ears and nibbling on his temple, it repeating his deeds ad nauseum. A parasite reciting a liturgy of mistakes. It looked like regret given teeth. It looked hungry for the apology it would never accept. The charm warmed against my skin, reminding me that safety has clauses. Dad patted my shoulder and told me she'd been an angel, which made me want to cry for reasons that didn't have names. He was a divorcee, and I was his only son. I took inventory of the room the way burglars do, lines of retreat, corners with history. He said some father thing about getting rest. I said some son thing about being fine. The creature chewed through another memory at his temple and called it justice. I saw him out with all the theater of normalcy. I didn't bear to tell him what it was saying, though the phrases crawled across my scalp like ants with a thesis. The door shut. The house clicked back into being only mine and hers. I stood there with the script for the next scene in my pocket. A vile blue stage direction. Act quickly. The kitchen had the good manners of a chapel after hours. I kept my hands busy so my head wouldn't make conversation. Pot, cup, the steady hum of the fridge that was a mouth earlier and now pretended it never learned language. I opened a container, stirred in the measure D had ordained. The liquid took the color of cobalt and citrus both. A contradiction I chose to believe. Hope is a bartender. Grief is the bouncer. I set the concoction aside to cool and let my thumbs do the idiot dance on my phone. I doom scrolled, a habit with poor posture. Ads tried to sell me better sleep. Articles invited me to be furious at strangers. Then the platform did its cruel parlor trick. A video memory popped up of us. Facebook loves to put in front of us that time is slowly slipping away moment by moment. There we were, a Twin Peaks watch party. Popcorn, too much laughter, a table that still had its first name in the corner of the frame. Our best friends, Mariana and Caitlin, arm in arm and full of life, full of joy and love. They died on the way home from this party. Drunk driver hit them with the full force of his pickup. He lived, regrettably. The memory refused to stay still. It pressed its face to the glass until the present fogged over. The algorithm didn't know what it was doing. Neither did I. It offered me a postcard from a country that had since been invaded. I watched younger me and Amelia become a moving picture with the volume down. She mouthed something that looked like forever. I mouthed back like I had authority. Then the clip ended because nothing knows how to end. I put the phone face down and still felt the light of it trying to jury-rig a future. The glass on the counter went a calmer color, as if temperature could be a promise. The house hummed, polite, no teeth. The backyard rehearsed a breeze for later. I lifted the concoction and walked it to her room. She slept like a person who hadn't been briefed on the villain. Small chest rising and falling rhythmically, lashes casting minor constellations on her cheeks. I placed the glass within reach Like a vote I knew would count. The charm at my chest cooled, as if it approved of the placement back in the kitchen. I stared again at the phone, that pocket mirror for a world that refuses to be only one world at a time. I thought about the two faces of Amelia. I thought about the war score we vowed would continue. I thought about a snake biting his tail and calling the circle destiny. I thought about Meridu on the table and Nergal in his book, and D saying, "No, but you'll be happy. Isn't that the point?" I wanted to be furious at the sentence for fitting so well. I unlocked the screen against my better judgment and scrolled past news that had sharpened itself just for me. The faces of Mariana and Caitlin kept wanting to be a door. I wouldn't open it. I couldn't. I set the phone down for the last time and watched the kitchen reassemble itself into something survivable. The thought struck like a polite knife. It didn't draw blood. It scored the wood. It sat down in the room and refused to leave. How many dead friends do I have on my social media? The morning came with good manners. Sunlight that asked before it entered. A breeze that knew the names of the leaves. Some months arrive like guests who wipe their feet. Clear skies and a soft breeze. Flowers begin to bloom, and nature decides to crawl out from the underbrush to proliferate. The yard rehearsed an old miracle and didn't seem tired of it. Everything grows, feeds, exists. Everything is in its place, and Amelia is better once more. The sentence felt like a bench finally empty enough to sit on. She didn't interrogate the gift. She doesn't ask me how it's possible when she feels well enough mentally and physically to make her own lunch. Mercy is easier to digest when you don't ask for the recipe. She doesn't question it when she's able to go out for a long walk to the animal shelter to give the lonely dogs some love. She just takes the moment with both hands and holds it close to her chest. We practiced ordinary, like it was an extreme sport. I tuned the house to a warmer key and watched her move through it with a competence that remembered itself. In the small, quiet moments where the foul whispers can't reach me and things aren't protruding from every single crack or crevice to mock me, I can just enjoy her happiness. Silence, for once, didn't have teeth, so we went looking for days we could keep. I take her on road trips to her favorite destinations. We pointed the hood toward places that still knew our names. Midnight movie drives, where the screen threw Godzilla-sized arguments at the sky, and she cheered like the ending was guaranteed. We don't focus on that. We just focus on what we have now. The parking lot air tasted like concession salt and possible futures. We let it. When the nights were less kind, we downsized joy and brought it indoors. She feels well enough to make her own lunch, so dinner became a small festival. She'd hum in front of the stove. I'd set plates like promises. Between courses, she'd step to the terrarium and say hello to the lizards in a tone I recognized from church. Gentle, private, grateful. I tried not to stare at gratitude in the wild. We talk more. A lot more. In the soft hours, we drafted legislation for our tiny country. I tell her about my fears of what happens when she's gone. She listens and absorbs them, waiting until I've spilled out every ugly feeling in me and felt lighter for it. She didn't rush the confession. She held the bowl while I emptied. When I ran out of sentences, She put a hand on my chest, like a stamp that said, "Received, day after day. Don't count. Just open." We built a porch big enough for the both of us. We made a study of small audacities, saying yes to second scoops and detours, buying postcards from places we hadn't earned, leaving the blinds open 1 extra inch so the night could see we weren't hiding. She was better once more, and I let the phrase "pay part of the rent" on the radio. Hosts argued over monsters. In our car, we agreed on our own. Grief had its lies, but we let the tires drown them out. I watched her profile in the passing neon and thought about how the body carries 2 clocks, one public, one private. On the public clock, we looked like any couple turning left toward gelato. On the private one, we were thieves, and the loot was seconds. She just takes the moment with both hands. That was the lesson. She'd lean into the warm night air at a red light and smile at nothing, which turned out to be everything. When a song we loved found us again, she sang harmony like she'd been saving it at home. We held office hours for hope. We placed the bonsai near the east window like an old friend. She trimmed in the quiet, breathing evenly, and whispered corrections to a branch the way a good editor whispers to a paragraph. I made tea and tried to balance the tray like competence was contagious. Everything is in its place. The cup by her right hand, the shears by the saucer, the chameleon watching like a small priest. Sometimes the whispers tested the weather. The house would remember how to creak like a large animal, deciding whether to stand. But tonight, the animal was lazy. Perhaps the charm at my chest had learned a new hymn. Either way, the corners behaved. I exhaled into a present tense that didn't mind me. We talk more, a lot more, about the old crashes and the new maps, about the jokes that aged well and the ones we retired with honors. I said the unsayable, quietly. She let it be said. She listens and absorbs, sometimes adding an anecdote like a mint leaf, sometimes just nodding until the room trusted us again. By the time the kettle sighed its second breath, I could stand up straight without apologizing on nights when the world shrank properly. We did the midnight movie drive, even if the movie was our reflection in the windshield. We do, so she can watch the Godzilla movies in anticipation of the final showdown she's almost certainly not going to see. We pretended we were there for spectacle. We were there for repetition, entrances and exits that obeyed the rules, a monster that died on schedule, credits that kept their promises. And then came the evening, with the question in it. The trees outside threw slow shadows on the curtain, like handwriting from a kinder-decade. Dishes were done. The lizards were asleep in their warm glass cities. The tea had decided to be memory instead of drink. She lay beside me, shoulder to shoulder, the kind of closeness that changes the math of air. The room was the exact temperature of confession. I turned toward her and let the words try walking on their own. I asked her a question. What would you do if you could just stay here forever? Like this? I kept my voice small so it wouldn't scare the hope we'd smuggled in. The ceiling fan practiced an amen. Outside, the neighborhood rehearsed tomorrow. Inside, I waited for her verdict on the impossible. Not a cure, not a bargain, just the audacity of stay. Hope is polite until you ask it to move in. That night, I asked. She lay beside me like a well-earned breath. The room tuned to confession. The ceiling fan practicing mercy in slow circles. I cleared my throat the way men do when they're about to ask for a miracle and pretend it's a plan. How important is this to you? Jasper? She asked, measuring the air like a tailor. Her voice was soft. The question wasn't. I said the only true thing I had. It's everything. You, me, this time where you're not sick. She didn't let me finish the sales pitch. But I am sick. Jasper, I'm dying. She said it kindly, as if sparing me from a longer sermon. I tried to reroute the conversation toward a road I'd already marked on a secret map. What if we could find a way to make you bet? And she stood up, gathering herself the way a woman gathers weather. Honey, I know this has been hard on you, not knowing which version of me you'll get on any given day, seeing me at my worst. But this is part of the journey. It's what I expected. You need to expect it too. I bit my lip and betrayed both of us. You'd want to leave me on my own? You wouldn't even try to change things if you could? What about alternative medicine? Cutting-edge technology? What if you could make a deal that would give you more time? How could you just think of yourself? The house flinched. Outside, the trees craned their necks through the window to observe, and I felt the shame arrive with its long ledger. She didn't shout. Not at first. She took a breath. And then the dam did what dams do when they've been good for too long. What you want is not as important as how we process this. You are not the one dying. Jasper, you are not the one waking up and not knowing if you'll be able to go to the bathroom on your own, if you'll know what the word food means, if you'll... She swallowed the next sentence before it could dress in our history. The insects, imagined or otherwise, skittered across the walls, sucking out the light as if drama needed scenery. She kicked the trash can hard enough to make the room remember metal. I want to spend every moment of freedom I have left in joy, without fear of what it does for you after I'm gone, until we reach the end. My exit ticket has been punched. Jasper, I know when I'll be gone. It's up to you to figure out that lack long after. She slid down the wall, pulling at her hair, and red-faced. I went to my knees in front of her, a penitent with bad timing. I won't let you go. I will fight to the bitter end, because that's what a life partner does. It sounded heroic in my head and selfish in the air. She looked at me like a nurse looks at a man who's confusing bravery with control. I'm just not ready to throw in the towel. Melia, I see a life ahead of us that has not yet been traveled. I'm determined to find a pathway there, and who knows? Maybe I've found one. I gently put my hand on the side of her head, a gesture that used to work. Tonight, it asked a different question. Her eyes went confused and frantic. Fight or flight, lighting the room under her skin. I forgot my own thesis. Amelia was sick. She was fearful of which version would come up when she awoke every day. I had gotten too comfortable, too enchanted by the fantasy of her being fine, not giving her more of the concoction. And it was the end of the month. The corners of the ceiling learned new angles. The bugs shriek a chorus of their warning calls. She didn't argue again. The body ran the next part. She said nothing, just growled. I saw the jaw set I've only seen in fighters and frightened dogs. Her teeth gritted, and then the world became proximity. The head came fast. She head-butted me with her full force, a bright white note that split into a choir. The floor said hello to my spine, and wind left me like it owed someone money. She pushed me to the ground on the way past good intentions, and followed with punctuation. A swift kick that persuaded every light in the room to turn out at once. I tried to say her name the way a rope says, hold, but the ladder folded into unconsciousness is not really into. It's more like the room stands up and leaves, and you stay seated out of habit. As I slid toward the black, my last inventory was small and disloyal. The trees still craning in the window, the insects still skittering, the trash can tilted like a question mark, and the thought that I had, indeed, traded in tenderness for a plan. Cut to dark, but night doesn't end where a man drops. It waits until he's able to hear it finish the sentence. When sense returned, it did so in little coins. Sound first, then pain, then the memory of the scene before the curtain. I tasted metal and apology, if I'm honest. This is where the sermon should end, with me learning my lesson at the cost of a bruise and a better haircut. But grief is not a clean classroom. Her rage had been an alarm. My denial had been a pillow over it. She didn't want to stay here forever. She wanted to stay herself for as long as the body allowed. And I had mistaken love for possession with a wedding ring. When I could stand, I would do all the usual aftercare. Ice, water, a lie about clumsiness. But the real work sat there, blinking. Accept the month's arithmetic, or go back to the man with the mask and ask him to sell me another gust of weather. And I already knew which route my hands would steer. For now, the scoreboard read what all scoreboards read eventually. She was still here for the moment, and the house had stopped being an audience. The insects, imagined or otherwise, retreated to their understudy roles. The trees went back to being trees, or to pretending well. I lay there and listened for her breath through the wall, the only meter that mattered, and promised the air I would try again, not to confuse devotion with conquest. The promise didn't believe me. Promises learn. A new month. It is a beautiful day, the kind that makes even silence feel domesticated. Grief doesn't end. It changes the weather. The air is cool enough to carry a memory without breaking it. I stand in the yard and let the morning take attendance. There is life all around us. Ants negotiating a leaf, a neighbor's radio trying to be a choir, my breath deciding to stay. I tip my head back because the body learns rituals before the mind approves. I look up at the night sky, even though it isn't night. Not here. Not now. Grief keeps its own clock. I see even more stars littering the canvas, and one refuses to behave. It's the one you'd point at if you were trying to explain hope to a child. There's one in particular that stands out, not because it's the loudest, but because it keeps the best rhythm. It shines right over me and radiates with its twinkling beauty, stubborn as a vow, quiet as a breath you hold for someone else. I think of vows that learned how to travel. I count without counting, far surpassing that of its siblings. The light holds, and I let it. The porch light blinks. The dog, 2 houses over, gives a single opinion. And somewhere a kettle reaches its small, triumphant note. The world resumes. And I don't argue. The color makes its case. It's fierce, bright, and pink. Not the pink of candy or cartoons, the kind orchids wear when they've decided to forgive winter. I say her name in my chest so the air can keep a secret. For a long moment, I listen to the sky listening back. I don't ask for signs. They tire too easily. But when a star keeps the shape of a person's laugh, you're allowed to believe it. I lower my head, touch the charm at my sternum. The way a man touches the edge of a doorway, he means to cross again, and head inside to make the kind of breakfast that feeds 2. 1 for the body, 1 for the room where she still waits. Somewhere above the roofline, the star keeps its post. I keep mine.